So how would you help somebody that may be in that season right now of maybe a transition that they weren't expecting?
I think the lesson that I learned walking that season out is just God is always good, even when his people aren't. Never confuse the two.
The words that we say on these young people,
They carry weight.
it carries so much weight.
A saying I like to say is the ripple effect of your obedience goes farther than you could ever imagine. And so those little conversations, as maybe not non-significant as you might think that they are, there's so many other people on the other side of that yes and that step that you take.
What is going on, everyone? I want to take a moment and say welcome back to another conversation with your friends, Rhett and Justin, right here at Armchair Authentic, where we're having real conversations about real life with real people. We're stewarding our stories and our relationships in a way that serve you. And today, Justin and I could not be more excited about our conversation with a ministry friend. Her name is Yancy. That's right, Yancy, not Nancy. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Yancy, let us bring you in on a little story. She's a singer. She's a songwriter. She's a 2-time Dove Award winner. She's a coach. She's a worship leader, and she's a podcaster. My friends, you are in for a treat today. We talk about a lot of things, and one of the things that stood out to me the most was this. What does it look like to have peace in the midst of tension? We talk about that and so much more today. So, without further ado, our conversation with our friend, Yancy.
Well, Rhett, we have with us in the Armchair Authentic Studios, Yancy. How are you, Yancy?
Hello. I'm so good. Happy to be with y'all.
Hey, it's so good to be with you too. We were kind of talking before, kind of pre-conversations before we actually start our recording, and trying to link some of the ways that we know each other. And we always find that it's a small world, Rhett.
It really is a small world. It's like 6 degrees of separation. I mean, we don't have to relive all that pre-talk, but at the end of the day, like, we know a lot of the same people. I mean, you mentioned the Franks. I mean, she was my math teacher, and I mean, there's so many other names to list that we've been around the same circles. And so, Yancy, it's really cool to finally get to just sit down, have a conversation, and talk to you about life and ministry, and obviously all the incredible things that the Lord has been using you in. But can I just say this? Like, Justin sent me a link last night. He said, "You got to check this out." It was History Maker, and it was your version of History Maker. And I was so impressed, Yancy, not just with your vocal ability, because I've heard that and you're incredible, but even just the production of that song. And so I was really impressed. So wherever you are right now, go look up Yancy, History Maker. I'm sure there's so many other songs that you would probably, I don't know, but I just, that one just struck a chord with my heart last night. You kind of took me back a little bit, and I was like, oh, me and Jesus were having a moment there in my armchair in the living room. That was beautiful. Yeah.
That was a new release, right?
Yeah. So there's this thing out there called 90s Worship Night, and it's a group of people that are just trying to kind of stir things back up and help people remember, seasons of their life and just some songs that spoke into them. And so they'd asked me to do a cover. And I was, songs are interesting. Mm-hmm. And I have realized it really takes probably a song at least about 5 years to really become like truly common, like worship circles. It's like it starts in certain types. So when you really start crossing all those denominational lines and stuff, I just have reflected on it. It's like it takes at least 5 years to get to that point. And so it was interesting because like I was thinking back to like the early 90s, and every song that I would remember, I'd pull it up and it would be like an 80s copyright. And I was like, well, that doesn't feel fair, and that doesn't count. Yeah. But it also proves my point, that it was songs from like the late 80s that by 93, like we were all singing together. So I kind of kept processing it more. And, obviously there's things like the Ron Canoli record that are just legendary.
You
that
just
season,
opened a box there. Ron Canoli, man. You just threw me back. Let's go, Ron. Let's go.
But I, thought back to it and I was like, okay, I told Delirious, that was like the tail end of my high school years and just singing on worship team and youth group and starting to lead worship myself. And it, I will say, like, when we're kind of to the end process, we've been, checking the mix and the master and all this stuff. And I finally had this moment that I just really got like chills because I just was fully aware of like what the lyric is in the song History Maker and just thinking back in time and going like, okay, so my 17-year-old self or whatever was saying these words and praying this prayer and just kind of having this moment to just reflect and remember on the years that have followed since and just the things that I've gotten to be a part of and seeds I've gotten to plant along the way. And I'm just like, how cool is that? Just in many ways,
absolutely.
Seeing answered prayers and then still being aware that this is still a prayer I want to pray and sing over my life. And it's a prayer that I would want to invite kids and families into as well. And imagine what can happen 25 more years down the road, so to speak. And so it's a cool thing to be a part of. It's been a fun.
Well, you nailed it.
Fun bit of nostalgia.
Yeah, well, you nailed it when you were saying just give somebody an opportunity to go back and reflect on maybe what God was doing in those moments. And that's exactly what happened to me last night. Even as we're talking about it, thinking about that moment. Because for me, I graduated in 1995. Now, I've learned the wisdom to never ask, a woman how old they are when they graduated high school. I'm not going to ask you that, but
so I don't care at all. I was born in 1980. Okay. I graduated in 98. So you're obviously just a few years older.
I got a few
Class
years.
of 96 right here.
Yeah. So, but all those moments, but it took me to this place where I was sitting there thinking, I was like, wow, look at what God has done. But it took me back to a moment of inspiration and a catalyst moment of what God was birthing in me to one day become hopefully a history maker, and a place to where maybe my life will make a difference and make an impact in some way, somehow for God's glory. And then as you were saying, like I was reflecting, wow, look at what God has done.
Yeah.
What God is doing is amazing, but thank God for what he did. And it was just a cool moment.
Yeah.
So,
and I love even how you're saying nostalgic. It is, when we're listening to this, you referenced the early 90s. I mean,
Sonic Flood.
Those, don't get me started, man. No, but those were powerful days. I mean, because we've referenced on previous episodes that, 1993. That was our year. We surrendered our life to Christ.
Yeah.
And you really had such a surge coming on at that moment of really just this powerful worship music. And it almost became so popular that you can sing a song and it got to a point where it's almost like over in a few months because the next big song's out. And what I love is when you're putting out History Maker and I'm listening to your version of it, first of all, it's got to be like, it's top 2 of the best versions I've heard of that song.
Hands down.
The way that you put it together, obviously the techies in us, the mix, everything. I love just your voice, when you're singing that, it just had such an edge to it, which, I think we love that. But when you can take a song and go back to it, it's almost timeless. Like that's powerful. And I love that. So when you say Ron Canoli, I would be so curious what those songs that you had to kind of, what would be the Yancy list? We're going to get nostalgic with you. That is something I've learned when from afar, getting to watch you in your ministry or your podcast, which we'll talk about more of that later. I've heard you talk to stories with your friends, and I'm sitting there thinking, me and Rhett, if we were in the living room with y'all, we would talk about the DC talks. We would talk about,
audio
adrenaline. And we're like,
original audio adrenaline.
We're like, we don't get to have a lot of these talks.
But was a fat man. So what? I thought he had a plan. I guess not.
Oh my gosh, you're taking me back.
Yancy don't know nothing about that. No,
I bet she does. She knows audio adrenaline. I guarantee you she knows audio adrenaline.
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
Oh yeah.
But that's kind of the framing I want to give you. Like, if you were thinking some of these songs that molded you, whether it made the list on this recording, what were some of those early songs that you can think of that really?
if I have to go even farther back. I think the Leon Patillo "The Sky Is the Limit" record.
Okay, let's go.
I mean, that album probably defines my childhood and my early elementary years, as far as like when I reflect on driving around in the car with my mom, what I remember hearing playing. There was this other Christian artist at the time called Dion.
I
don't know that one.
I looked it up recently. He's done a lot of other things over the years, but I remember in particular like a couple albums with that. Mylan Lefevre.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Mom was a big Mylan fan.
Was Carman ever on that list for you?
Well,
with all respect,
for sure. So Carman certainly, of course, was, and I will say, before I even say the rest of all the things I have to say about Carman, when he passed away, as typically will happen with me when someone like that does pass away, I pull up their greatest hits album or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you what, like I had a moment, especially going farther back into his catalog than some of the things that just automatically pop in my mind when I think about him. I had a moment where I was just like so moved by how much of the Bible was in those songs, and I realized in a way that I don't think I had processed in particular with Carman before, just like, oh my goodness, that was formational in me, because I could, of course, sing along with so many of the songs that were in the greatest hits, and especially even in the 80s part of his catalog. I spent a lot of years in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was Carman's hometown.
Yeah, oh, wow.
Especially in what I think really was his heyday of the 90s. I took piano from his music director. So
that's cool.
I'm very, very aware of Carman. Let's never forget he was the first Christian artist to fill Texas Stadium.
Oh my God!
Every stadium.
Phenom. I mean, say what you want about it, but I mean, for free concerts, filling up arenas. This blew me away.
Before I ever went to a Carman concert, God, I love that we can have this conversation. This is so therapeutic. Yancy is our therapist today. Thank everybody. But I remember, so Rhett was always the friend that got the latest technology, and I never got anything.
Well, you got stuff.
Well, let's just say when the disc, when CDs came out, the little Discman, the headphones. Rhett went to a Carman concert and loaded up on his merch, and I just remember one night he's like, I was in my dad's room. He said, just lay on this bed, and he said, put these headphones on. And he turned all the lights out and he said, hit play, and I'm going to walk out of the room. And it was the Carman song, Third Heaven.
Yeah.
Where it's like, that's the one where it's like there was evidently a car crash. They lost him and he goes into heaven. And it's like you said, it's revelations.
Yeah.
It's Carman describing the throne room. Yeah. And I am not surrendered to Christ at this time. But talk about seeds that were planted. You wound up with thank you, Rhett.
Yeah.
You wound up with a Carman album.
Yeah. Let me say this, just pause the story really quick. So like I was always the one that would like give my heart to Jesus really young from these moments, like a Carman concert. And then I would come back and I didn't have a church family or whatever. And then I'd be like, Justin, oh my God. And Justin would always be the guy like, I'm going to do anything and everything I can to get Rhett away from that.
Yes.
Isn't that amazing?
Well, it was taking our time away. I needed my friend back.
Yeah, you needed your friend back. So there was these pockets, and there was these pockets of moments where I was like, I gave my life to Jesus, and Justin's like, yay, okay, give it 3 months, and you'll be back doing that stuff we've always done. Yeah. Anyway, so
but that's why
that was one of those moments.
But it
for me.
planted a seed, actually, listening to that, and that would be probably 2 years later. I really surrendered my life to Christ. So, but when you jump into some of these early songs and the scriptures and where he came from on all this stuff was amazing. Okay, so Carman, I know we had to pause and tell that story.
Yeah, so I have to. So living in Tulsa, with Carman in the 90s or whatever, but it goes back and forth between either being the greatest decision I've ever made or the worst decision I've ever made.
I can't wait to hear this.
But I was given the opportunity by my piano teacher, shout out to Willie Davis, to be in the Carman DC Talk Addicted to Jesus music video.
No way.
Oh, come on.
They were going to be shooting it in the middle of the night, you know, because it was dark and a night scene and whatever. And there were the cans of fire and stuff.
Yeah.
And at that point in my life, I was like, you know, probably so in love with DC Talk. I was just like, I don't know. I'm too nervous to like be in the same room with them.
Oh my God.
So I declined the opportunity because I felt like I was going to melt under the pressure of being in there with them. But you know, I've had many years where I was like, okay, it was the best decision I ever made. That there is not that video evidence.
Well, that's okay. Yeah,
I was
looking
at
that.
Yeah,
and then other times where I'm like, I should have done it. You know, what was I thinking?
We were going straight to Google until you just told us you're not in it. Funny story here. We were at a DC Talk concert one time, me and Rhett, and it was actually no, it was Newsboys.
It was a Newsboys
and Audio
concert.
Adrenaline. Okay. Me and Rhett are on the side, like watching Newsboys. I'm kind of to the side, left. Back where the green room, I guess, would have been, but I'm in the crowd.
Yeah.
And I look next to this guy with me because I wanted to look at this guy like, whoa, that was awesome. And I look, and it's Michael from DC Talk.
Michael Tate.
We're just standing right beside each other, and I look at him and kind of give him a nod, and I look back at the stage, and then I have the realization, oh my gosh. So being the good friend that I am, I left immediately and grabbed Rhett, who is 3 people over. And I don't know why, but I say, Rhett, it's Toby. It's Toby. And me and Rhett goes with it. And we run up to Michael and basically like grab him. We're like, Toby. And he just kind of nods at us and grins and slowly slides on backstage. And as we're yelling Toby, Toby walks right beside us and goes backstage. And we realized, oh no, that's Toby.
Wrong person.
And so we missed this great opportunity to actually just hang out with him because we were fanboying it like crazy.
We were very caught up in the moment.
Since you went there, I never get to tell this story, so I'm going to tell it. So I made my first album in 97, and I don't know, this probably happened in like 98-ish or something. So a friend of ours that at the time was working at a church here in Nashville, was the church that Toby went to. He gave Toby my album. And this was like around the same era as Jennifer Knapp.
Yep.
98,
so
97.
This one day, randomly get a phone call, Toby McKeon.
Oh, let's go.
Oh, gosh.
And he just called and was like, you know, our mutual friend gave me your album. He had listened to some of it. You know, he was like, I'm not able to do anything or interested in doing anything because right now we've got this other, you know, female artist, which, you know, makes sense or whatever. But he just told me about how DC Talk first started and how they borrowed money from his dad and, you know, made their first little album, paid him back, and, you know, talked about that whole journey. You know, I like hang up the phone and I'm like screaming through the house because, you know,
that's so
for an 18-year-old to randomly get a phone call from Toby.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
it's so sweet. It's one of those things that you realize, like, he didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
He did it, I'm sure, being a good friend to that guy that worked at his church, but how much that meant, you know, for me.
I bet.
At that point in my life and my career to, you know, have him take the time to call and just tell me it was good and, you know, encourage me. Like,
I mean,
to take the time to do that because that would have been when he was Goatee Records, right? Yeah. And they only had probably so much energy, you know, because I think at that time they had Jennifer Knapp, Grits, Grammatical Revolution in the Spirit. I cannot believe we did that. we're awesome. And then then there was Out of Eden.
Yeah.
So they're probably
Lovely
like,
day.
we want to add Yancy to this repertoire, and we have 3 that we have to focus on right now.
Yeah, when you mentioned Out of Eden, I had no idea Lovely Day. Like I was so disconnected from the world. I thought that was like an original like
It was a cover song.
and I had no idea. And then like I'm so sheltered in my, Christian box at this point of just where I was religiously at that moment that I've totally missed the fact that was the cover. Then I hear it one day. I'm like, oh, Out of Eden did that. And they're like, no, this song was recorded years ago.
I learned it when I had
no idea.
I was watching with my kids' Secret Life of Pets, and I'm like, they're singing Lovely Day.
There you go.
An
was
older
that
version.
When you first
I
found
did.
out?
I always thought that Out of Eden wrote that song.
Okay.
That was pretty recently.
Yeah,
I know. Yes, Yancy. Yes, it was recently. As y'all can see the sarcasm on my face through your ears right now, because I'm like, yes, I realize that I completely should have known this, but I was pretty sheltered in my own music history too.
Just to give a shout out to our friends' podcast, but do y'all listen to 1 Degree of Andy?
No.
Do you know about that?
Tell us about
it.
it.
So
I'm writing it down.
Andy Chrisman from For Him.
Oh, we know Andy.
He has he has a podcast going back and interviewing CCM artists from the 80s and 90s.
My goodness.
Yeah.
And hearing their whole backstory and how they did what they did, and
gotta add that to my list.
It's some good listening for someone like yourself that would be aware.
So that's
really good.
Nostalgic.
Well, I'm sure you know Roger Breland.
Yep.
Yeah. So
I mean, I know of him.
Yeah. So it's so funny. I was served at church in Mobile at one season of my life. And Roger Breland's son was the pastor. And so I got to know Roger. And I had no idea that he was a huge integral part of putting For Him together.
Yeah.
But I had met Andy through North Star and played keys for him a couple of times and met him just on and off or whatever. Yeah. But I was thinking, oh, no big deal. But what I appreciate about Andy is one time we were at a conference or something, and it was in Jacksonville, Florida.
Oh, yeah.
And it had been like 10, 15 years. And I'm sitting there talking to him. He's like, bro, have we met before? And I'm like, well, we have. And he was like, was it in Texas? I was like, how in the world is, I don't know if his memory, but I was like, yeah, I was at North Star. He's like, that's right, man. You played keys for him. I was like, oh my God. So I just huge shout out to Andy. Like what impressed me about Andy is he's this, obviously his, repertoire and all the artists and awards and stuff he's done is huge. But like as a person, for him to, take the time and to remember your name and remember a moment and stuff, that it made me feel.
Well, it was cool.
It was a blessing
because we had our own story. Because in the same way, a friend of mine is Mark Harris, who is also with For Him. And the fun thing is, once you get to know him as friends, I finally admitted to him later that me and Rhett would drive down when we became fired up. I got to go there.
Okay,
I got to. In '93, we surrendered our life to Christ. We were as fired up as you can imagine. Mm-hmm. Rhett had the car with the loudspeakers, so we would drive down the Panama City Strip up and down for hours, and we'd be blaring any CCM artist in that day.
We're trying to reach people for Jesus, Yancy. We were
but we were so passionate when a song would play, and I still remember "The Real World" by For Him kicking in, and me and Red are singing it out. We're crying as we're driving down the strip, like interceding for these people. And of course, in those days, if you hit a bump, the CD skips. So you'd hear the CD skip, and me and Rhett would be in the middle of a high Andy Kreisman note, which clearly it didn't sound like Andy. but I would
His
share.
voice is so high.
He can sing, and I would share those stories of Mark, and I was like, I can maintain, my integrity here and tell Mark, like we fanboyed back in the day, so just be aware. I do know your former life before him, so there are definitely ones of them. By the way, we need to check that out.
Yeah.
All right,
you do.
I want to dive into your story a little bit. Obviously, raised as a PK, you have a podcast that's all about hearing the PK stories. So we're going to kind of
Stained Glass Kids.
Yes, and we're going to talk a lot about that. And we'll put that in the show notes where people can connect to that and follow that. It's absolutely powerful. I listened to one episode of a friend, and I was like, wow, way to go. And you're so good at how you just navigate that and the questions you ask. So we might not be anywhere close to asking the powerful questions that you're used to asking.
She can ask the questions.
Because you're good at it. But I'm really curious, as a PK, like when was the moment for you where you felt called into ministry? What was that? What was that like? I mean, you were in ministry growing up because you didn't have a choice. So what was that like for you?
Well, it's interesting because it's like, it's not that I have like a singular moment. It's not like I can point back to and go, oh, it was this camp and this altar call and,
Yeah.
like anything. Really, I'm truly like, it was just as I kind of fell into doing music. I remember in particular, I always spent Saturdays at the church with my dad. And I guess they had like a worship team practice on Saturday afternoon. And one day a girl didn't show up that should have been there. And, as a good firstborn or whatever, I was like, I'll do it.
Let's go.
And so I just kind of like stepped into that, and which then, kind of was a snowball thing of like a children's choir that we had. And I mean, my first solo with the kids choir performance was to Awesome God, back when that was a new song.
Oh yeah.
And it just kind of became this like snowball thing then. And so I always kind of say like, and I know this goes back to being single digits. So somewhere between 7 and 9 years old, it just kind of became this like knowing I had, as confident as I am that my parents named me Yancy and that's my first name.
Yeah.
It just got to be where I knew like music is something that he has put me on this earth to do. And so everything just kind of started moving in the direction of making music be a part of my life. And, obviously in a church setting, there's plenty of opportunities for that to be the case. Worship teams and singing special musics and stuff. What's been interesting in I guess last handful of years is really reflecting on so many volunteers and conversations I would have with them on those Sundays that I did sing the special music in children's church, or whatever area ministry. And looking back on it now, I'm like aware, and I'm like, they knew. Like those volunteers, God prompted something inside of them. Those conversations, those encouragements. That was not by accident. They might not have known fully what I was going to do, but there was some sort of inkling that there's something on her life, and just how they called it out of me, over the years, is something I'm really thankful for.
Wow.
I love that you're still deeply moved when you're telling that story. Is it just the belief they had in you, or is it you're now, I would imagine, your story, you're pouring into a lot of people and you're noticing the same thing when you see the call in others?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of things to it. I think, when you work in a church and you understand just the role of volunteers and the part that they play. And I think like these weren't people that were getting a paycheck, like these were ordinary people in our church, men and women that served, that God highlighted to them.
Yeah.
Talk to her, compliment her, encourage her, celebrate her. And I think I'm moved because I just realized like, oh my goodness, they actually took the time to do it, and just reflect and be thankful. And at the same time, be aware moving forward, just those conversations that you're having in a classroom with kids and with students, like it's more formational than you ever realize it is in the moment, but they will get 30 years down the road and be moved to tears thinking about the fact that someone believed in them and encouraged them. So I think that's the side to it that I realize, and I think it's mixed with just being thankful, being so thankful that they did follow those promptings and they took the time to do it, because realizing everybody has a choice, and lots of people get promptings from God to do things that they don't actually do. And so anytime somebody follows through, there's a saying I like to say is the ripple effect of your obedience goes farther than you could ever imagine. And so those little conversations, as maybe not non-significant as you might think that they are, there's so many other people on the other side of that yes and that step that you take.
Hey guys, Red here. Just want to take a moment and say thank you to every single one of you who have taken the time to follow us on social media. Now, if today is your first time to join us for an episode, man, we want to say welcome, friends. It's so good to have you with us. Could you take a moment, look us up on Instagram or Facebook? You can find us there at Armchair Authentic, or you can go on over to X, find us there as well at Armchair Auth Pod. That's Armchair Auth, AUTHPOD. All right. Now back to the conversation.
I find it really interesting is they don't know necessarily in that moment, maybe still not even now, the impact that they had on you. And I do think that, we live in such a microwave society. Everything's so fast paced that we forget the power of actually slowing down. And we also, we tend to see more significance as you get a little bit older. And we don't realize the power that the weight, the words that we say on these young people.
Yeah. They carry weight.
It carries so much weight and you don't realize it. And so, I've been asked this past year, I have 4 boys, but I have 2 of them that are second and 4th grade. And I came in to lead worship for their school. Really, I did it just to help the school. I did not expect anything in this, but it's become the highlight of my week.
Yeah.
Every Wednesday, going in there, just leading some choruses for these young kids. I wouldn't have known the impact. The mom came up to me about a month ago and said that her little one, 8 years old, wanted to get baptized and asked if I would be the one to do it. And I'm not necessarily in church with her in this case. I'm going to her school, even though we go to the same church. But there was a connection there that she wanted me to be the one to baptize her. And in this case, I was available to do that. And it was so sweet.
Yeah.
Because I never would have thought anything of me coming in and doing this. I'm actually obviously blessed by the one getting to do it. But when you see the impact it makes on these young people, it's huge. And I can only imagine, Yancy, the people who saw that in you, they probably have no clue right now the impact that made. I think it's a reminder just to, even as we listen and ponder on this podcast, that it's okay to take our time.
Yeah.
It's okay to not try to fast forward these moments and actually we talked last week, where's God in this?
Yeah.
Asking that question whenever you have contact with someone, like someone looked at Yancy and said, what's God doing in her life through this? Obviously she's not about to take off now, but something is on her life. Where's God in this? And what can I say to impact her?
Yeah. Something that came to mind as you were talking was, and social media algorithms are the most bizarre thing in the world. Let me preface this, but I can remember 2 times in last decade or so. And one was I was getting to sing back up for Michael W. Smith at a local church. And, so I posted some photos of that or whatever. And the other time was when I won my first Dove Award. The people that came out of the woodworks on both of those posts who commented the most were those people that knew Yancy in the 80s and the 90s. They were the ones that had skin in the game.
Yeah.
And as much as people that have known me in recent years were excited and thought that was cool, those photos and those posts were victory laps for those people that knew me in those formational years. And I just thought that was the coolest thing, seeing names that don't normally just show up in my feed on a regular basis. Sure, we might be friends and we might have the mutual friends and, how the algorithm works to actually let them end up seeing it and they suddenly interact that day. But it's not lost on me, the names that showed up on those 2 posts. And I recognize that they had a part to play.
Yeah. Wow. The power of the person who gave their time because they wanted to come minister. Obviously, kids ministry is such a very important part of you. Like you, with the album we're talking about, or the song we're talking about with History Maker, I mean, that's awesome. I mean, it's on my playlist. I mean, it sounds so good. But you also have released so many projects, and it is focused on establishing the presence of God and teaching kids. Just the power of the presence of God and leading them in worship so that they can have a lifestyle of worship. I would imagine that was birthed from some of these moments that you experienced as a kid. How did that really begin to play out in your life?
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting. So obviously, like as you guys know about my story in my life, like children's ministry is something I grew up being around and was very familiar with. Now, as I go back to, my original musical goals, it was cover of CCM magazine, like it was a totally different focus. And we both can pinpoint back to a season of life where when I started making music, it was normal sounding, and it was for my peers and young adults and just kind of a little bit more typical CCM. Somewhere along the way, fast forward a few years into that, I was getting to lead worship more and more. In particular, that season of my life, it was more so for student ministry, young adults even. But of course, like just because of my family history, I'd always served with kids or, even helped lead worship for preteens and stuff. But there was it was really, I guess, a journey over the span of about 5 years. And it was a variety of things. One, I started being asked to write the theme song for a summer camp program for a camp that was in Oklahoma that we were a part of. And, at that point in life, they needed someone that could write songs. And I was the girl that went to Nashville and wrote songs. So they were like, Yancy, write us a song.
Of course.
And, I kind of say it was, God led me through a series of a bunch of easy yeses. Okay. Because me saying yes to write a theme song for a summer camp program for kids, that was one song. I wasn't signing my life away and saying, here I am, Lord, use me. It was just write the one song and kind of fast forward to the next year. Same thing happened again. And somewhere in this as well, some friends that had a ministry in Atlanta had asked me to come and sing as a guest vocalist on some albums they were making for kids. And so I've done that a couple of different times. So we get to 2006 and I realized I'm like, okay, there's these like camp songs over here. There's these couple songs in Atlanta. I could get master use on those. I could go in the studio, record like 4 songs and release an album for kids.
Yeah.
And so it just was like an easy choice. And at that point, I know kids ministry people. It's not like I was deciding to do something and wouldn't have an opportunity to make it available. So it just was more so like an easy business decision. And I remember my dad said, he was like, don't be offended, but you're going to sell more of this than you have of any of that other stuff. And that probably is true. Like in reality, like it went well, people enjoyed it. That next year I made what is the first Little Praise Party album, which are the songs that I make with the cartoon version of me and kind of for younger kids. So I made that first album actually for my church because I was on staff there at the time. So again, no long-term vision. It was more so like they want a preschool record that's going to match their curriculum. So they've got a song to sing every month. I have enough musical experience. I could make it happen for them. So I did it. And so then actually right after that record came out, just a bunch of life stuff happened and was walking through some changes that were going to mean I was going back on the road full time to do music. But at that point, I'm doing music for every age because I've now made these kids records. I'm overseeing the kids worship at church and student ministry, and I'm helping lead worship for adults on Sunday morning. And, I'm fully aware I can't go on the road saying, I do it all, you know, like that's not going to work. And so I just started walking some things out, and actually had one tour that I signed on to lead worship for middle school students that year. Ended up with this other opportunity with the same organization to lead worship for preteens that school year. Had people, you know, just ministry friends that were randomly calling me up and asking me to do a preteen event when I didn't officially say I did that. And it just got to a certain point where it was really easy to see that Jesus was shining a light on the path that was kids and families. And I think when I got to that point, obviously, like, I understand the impact of it, you know, the gravity of it. Like, kids ministry is not anything that was foreign to me. It was nothing I'd ever thought of for myself. But it's not like I had to be convinced, you know? And so it just got to this point that I was like, okay, I think God is telling me to do this. And in many ways, I kind of say, like, you know, I don't think God could have showed me as a 16-year-old that one day the number one song in my catalog would be a song I wrote for preschoolers, you know, called Hosanna Rock. Like, I don't think 16-year-old Yancy was ready to hear that was the peak.
I appreciate your honesty with that. Yeah.
The music. Yeah. And so, you know, and I think God's aware of that, and he's clever. So he didn't tell me as a 16-year-old. He waited and told me, you know, more so as a 26, 27-year-old, that he had some things for me to do in that space. And so when I got to that point, really, this would probably been like fall of 2007. It in many ways, it was like, for the first time, all the pieces of my life made sense. And God had taken my family and the history of that, and the music, you know, and the learning to write songs, lead worship, all that, and put it in a blender. And I can genuinely say, like, never once was there a family conversation with my parents where they were like, hey, have you thought about mixing children's ministry and music together? Like, none of us were that clever. That just is God's creativity and perfect design of, like, giving me a lifelong of awareness and knowledge of what that looks like, what churches need, how ministry happens, maybe what works, what doesn't work, like all of that, going into Nashville and legit learning to write songs. And even, you know, at this point, I'd already had a song that was recorded by Avalon, had been number one on the radio for 5 weeks. I'd legit, you know, done it, you know, and I mean, and there's more to that story too, because I can back up a little bit as well and say that preceding this, like, why in the road, I had ended up on staff at our church for 2 years, like full-time employee. And it's an interesting dynamic because I knew that I was supposed to be there and I was supposed to be doing that. At the same time, they were in a big ministry transition as far as the music and worship goes. I was a part of the change. And so, you know, as anybody that's ever worked at a church that knows, when they're steering the ship in a new path, there's just a lot of hitting your head against the wall that can happen. And so, you know, I remember there were many times that I would call my dad, you know, so frustrated and annoyed just by where I was and what I was doing. And I realized through that there could be peace in the midst of tension.
That's good.
Because on one hand, I was frustrated and I was not satisfied and fulfilled. On the other hand, I was convinced I was going to die doing that job, you know, because like, I don't mean that negatively. I just meant, like, this is where I'm supposed to be, and this is where I'm spending my life. This is what I'm committed to. But in that season, at the same time, I'm starting to question God and go, why did I go to Nashville? did I miss it somewhere before? Like, why did I go learn to record?
Yeah.
Why did I go learn to write songs? Because none of that stuff was officially part of what it was that I was doing in that season.
Yeah.
Of course, looking back on it now, I'm able to see, okay, there can be peace in the midst of tension. And that really, in so many ways, I was picking up the last tools I needed in my tool belt of having worked at a church, having worked at a mega church, having led worship teams, coached worship leaders, raised up young people that, started as teenagers, but were then the ones leading on the main adult stage, and some of those still actively are involved in doing that in that church to this day. And so I needed to acquire those skill sets and acquire those elements to my bio, my resume, whatever, in order for me to then step into that next season of life of what it's looked like ever since, really by officially the start of 2008, where I knew like, okay, I'm going to make the follow-up to that first kids record that was just a bunch of mixed masters and, step into doing this for kids and families and finding more and more ways to resource the church in the area of kids worship. And I do that in a variety of ways, but it's been a fun journey.
So Yancy, when you were talking about that, can you kind of go through how you made that decision? Because you just said you could have seen yourself, this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. I think when people are listening, they're in that same kind of position. What did you go through to actually make that step? Like I know you said there were the frustrations.
Are you talking about the step out of it
or the
step into it?
The step out of that position that you were in for so long.
Well, it's it's complicated as churches can be. So it wasn't, stepping out of it wasn't a huge decision. My dad had been on staff at that church for just shy of 18 years. He was in the process of leaving. I have his DNA. It was one of those situations I had to go to. Mm-hmm. And so, in the moment it sucked.
Yeah.
I'll be honest.
Yeah.
Because it was an exit that I wasn't asking for or signing up for, but you're looking back on it, of course, you can see that, okay, what sometimes feels like an exodus was actually leading me to my promised land. Yeah. And so that's kind of the twist of what happened, that I went back to doing music full time rather than working at a church.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you for that. Just, being so vulnerable on this podcast and opening up the way you have.
One of the questions I was going to ask you is around challenges and things you've gone through and faced in life, and how did you overcome it? We're kind of there in this moment. The reason I like to ask that question is so that we can help others who might be walking into it or walking out or walking through some of that. So how would you help somebody that may be in that season right now of maybe a transition that they weren't expecting? Like knowing your perspective now, hindsight's 20/20 in your perspective, how would you speak to that person to help encourage them through a moment that may be a transition that's tough?
Yeah. I mean, related to that particular thing, I think the lesson that I learned walking that season out is just God is always good, even when his people aren't. Never confuse the two.
That is so
and I think,
good.
I think that's where a lot of people, that we all know and have their number in our phone and could think of, comes to mind, where you realize there's something that happens in their journey with, really it's their Christianity, even though it can seem like it's with the church. Something happens, and how they process that speed bump or that, those wounds, whatever they look like, they end up focusing too much on the people that were involved. And I think I ended up in a situation that, it was broken. I was in a pile of rubble as far as I built my music career up to a certain point and then really kind of got so busy doing this church thing that I didn't have any time or energy for the music thing. And, and now I got nothing, like, what am I going to do?
Start all over again.
And so, I was at a place mentally, I guess you could say spiritually too, where I knew like, this is so messed up right now. Like, I can't fix this. Like, I was fully aware my only option is to let God come in and do something with this and direct my steps and open up some doors and provide new opportunities. And I think a lot of people that are out there, when they go through something hard, they just don't open up to let their faith go into action to allow God to step in and make a miracle and make something beautiful out of the mess. And it's interesting because way back in the earlier years of, this transition, there were a couple times that I was having dinner with a friend from life. And in particular, these two people were people that really had walked away from their faith as some stuff happened. And I find it interesting that these are the two people that followed up with this statement. But, maybe it was like the next day and I would get a message from them after them hearing just some of the reality of what my life was and stuff I was walking through. And they both said something to the effect of, I'm so impressed that you're able to not let this shake your faith. And I think that's where it became pretty crystal clear to me that for both of these people, when something bad and hard happened, they allowed that situation to shake their faith. Ultimately, they had their faith in obviously a man and not actually in God.
Yeah.
But I think it highlighted to me just the difference of the path that we were choosing and had chosen moving forward. And so, I knew my life and my situation I was in was such a mess. My only option was to let God heal it and fix it. And so I guess that would be my encouragement, my challenge to somebody listening.
How much would you credit the way you were raised by your parents for the way you handled that situation and the other situations in your life to put faith in God and not in man? How much would you credit your raising to your parents?
I mean, I'm sure 100%. Okay. I mean, my parents, I've always spoken a lot into me, and I feel blessed as well for the environment that I was in for a lot of those formational years. Because I know the word of God that was put into me through that. And so, I think even we had changed churches 5 or so years ago. And even in the process of us changing churches for my family, that was one of the things as my boys were getting a little bit older, I realized I know what was put in me in the children's ministries and in the churches and in the sermons that I grew up in. And I know my kids aren't going to get that from the church environment I was in. And so that was one of the big factors for me into moving somewhere else where I knew that what was going to get put in them on Sunday mornings. And from the other people they were going to church with and those other volunteers and leaders that were going to speak into their life was going to be something stepping up the ante on how much faith and stock we're putting the word of God in our life in.
As a pastor, it is my greatest desire and greatest success that not just my wife and I, but my son, who's 17, goes on to love God with all his heart, all his mind, all his soul, all his strength. And what he does with that, I that's up between him and the Lord. But my greatest desire, my greatest success is seeing my son's relationship with Jesus. And I think every pastor out there wants that, says that, hopes that happens. Yeah. Unfortunately, with the beauty of your podcast is that that's not always the case with PKs, unfortunately. And so
when I hear your story and hear the way that you're living your life and then make the choices and your love for Jesus and looking at God and in and through everything and trusting in him, no matter what the situation you've ever faced, like I look at that and I go, man, that's amazing. And so that has to come. That's why I'm like, how much would you credit your parents for that? And I think that's awesome. That speaks so well of, you know, your mom and dad. But could you give us an example? Because I think practically speaking, and I'm sure there's so much there, but could you give us an example of what it was like to grow up as a Weidman? You know what I mean? Like, I mean, that I don't know. Was there a lot of pressure there? I don't know, but obviously they did something right. I mean, they're not perfect. No parent is, you know, pretty close to it, I'm sure. But like, can you give me some ingredients that were in your household that led to you being able to overcome stuff like this and be able to see this type of perspective and choose to see God in and through every situation, despite what people choose to do or not do?
Yeah. I mean, man. My parents are both intense people. I mean, so on one hand, obviously, you know, like dad's funny and bonkers in the craziest way. But then both my parents are pretty intense. And so, yeah, I mean, they certainly are people that there's a bar, you know, of what they're always going to point to and be calling you to. But I think, I mean, my parents were really good at just talking to us. And when I reflect on what they did, I think the thing that sticks out to me that I would encourage parents with is they spoke in repetition. And so they said a lot of the same things over and over and over to the point of cliche, and you're rolling your eyes at certain times, right?
That's so good. Okay.
But at this, you know, and just like as an example, this would tie back to the earlier part of our conversation. Mom wrote Love God, Hate Sin, which is the title to my little favorite Broken Heart song. She signed every birthday card, every letter to camp. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, like if I think about my mom, I'm going to think about the phrase Love God, Hate Sin.
Wow.
Like that, I don't do the same thing. I signed the birthday cards and the letters to camps to my boys. Love God, Hate Sin, as well. But you know, that was just something that she said over and over and just worked into our life. That I think there becomes a point that soaked into the fiber, you know, of my being. There were things that my dad, you know, always talked about, especially like related to relationships or whatnot. And, you know, I remember times that I was probably rolling my eyes like, here we go again. And then I also remember, you know, remember points in my life where I kind of drew a line in the sand and was like, I want that for my life. And I realized that none of that could have happened if they had only ever said it once, twice, 3 times, even 5 times. Mm-hmm. It took it becoming a choice and a part of who I was because they said it hundreds of times throughout my life. And so, you know, and I can think about scripture, like we know there's repetition in scripture, whether it be certain verses that you see it in the Old Testament and the New Testament, or it's repeated in the New Testament, or the Psalms.
Yes, good.
And I think it's Psalm 136, you know, which is the one where it's like it says something and then his love endures forever. Yeah. And I think about that, and I think, you know, for somebody reading that or whoever was singing it on that particular day, it might have soaked in and someone caught and grasped his love endures forever on verse 5. For somebody else, it was number 13, a little farther down. Yeah. You know, however many times he was repeating there. I guarantee you, there was someone on that last verse of that chapter that finally was like, oh, you know what?
I get it.
His love endures forever.
They're like, thank you for repeating that 6 times. I wouldn't have been around to finally say it, but now I can.
So you know, I've seen the light.
That's so good. So simple yet so powerful.
Yeah. I think that's something I can reflect on and say, I think was a really important thing. And I think another example of just one of those things is, I think, related to me learning to listen to God's voice. So I kid you not, there were so many times in life growing up, I would think I heard one of my parents say my name, and call me from one end of the house to the other. And I remember, I guess I'm double digits at this point. I could have even been a teenager. I remember walking from the side of the house where the bedrooms were to the kitchen was on the other side, going in and saying, like, what do you want? And they're like, I didn't call you. But both my parents, every single time that would happen, they would say, if you hear it again, say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening.
Yes, let's go.
Yeah.
And I can remember being at the mall as a teenager, fully convinced that they were calling my name on the loud comm of the Dillards.
I remember those days. Yeah.
But I think reflecting on it, I think all of that was, it was just sharpening my awareness to listen to his voice. And if I reflect on a lot of things over the years, that's what it comes down to, of being convinced that I was hearing him speak. I had a music opportunity. This would have been back in 96. So I'd done my first concert ever as a 15-year-old, August 16th, 1995. Shout out to my youth pastor that asked me to do it. Changed everything. Shout out to Jeff Abels. And that next year, at this point, I've recorded a little 2-song demo, but that's the extent of what's really happening. And I had a chance to join this music group that had a record deal happening over in Europe. And there were a lot of things happening in this group. There was rap and dance, and I'd be the girl singing the chorus. And we were supposed to go to London, had the tickets bought, got my passport to go. Would have been my first time out of the country. And I got to a certain point in the whole process, and I remember walking into the kitchen and telling my parents.
Hey friends, just want to take a moment and say, if you are enjoying today's conversation, could you do us a huge favor? Would you take a moment and copy the link from your favorite podcast platform and share it with a friend? Email it to a friend. How about airdropping it over to your buddy or your sister right now? Man, that would mean so much to us. Thank you. All right, guys, back to the conversation.
And I got to a certain point in the whole process, and I remember walking into the kitchen and telling my parents, I'm not supposed to do it.
Wow.
And on one hand, it's everything that I technically want. They were going to have a record deal. I was going to get to record and do all the things. And at this point, I'm not doing those things. And it took a lot of years for that story to make sense. But I can point back again to my parents and that speak, Lord, your servant is listening.
Yeah.
I realized me being able to do that at a freshly 16-year-old self was because I had been learning to hear God's voice.
Yes.
And I was confident in it.
Yes.
Even if it wasn't the fun thing.
So
and for the record, anyone listening that has a connection, I still have not ever been to London, y'all.
I would
and
not imagine that.
God owes me a really good trip to London.
Yes.
All expenses paid. Wink, wink.
Yeah.
In exchange for this obedience. So just putting that out there.
Hey, you never know what ears are now going to hear it, and they need to say, speak, God. I'm listening to what Yancy's saying. God, that's so good, Yancy. And how you're talking about learning how to obey his voice, you can begin to see the puzzle piece come together that we didn't have the context to earlier. So now here you are in ministry in a role that you think you're going to be in the rest of your life. Major transitionings beginning to happen. It is rattling you.
Yeah.
A lot of people who've been with you here have kind of backed out of not just the church, but the faith in general. Their wounds are loud. You've learned to listen to the voice of the Lord. And I love how you just said that even when it's not fun. because by paving that for the listener, I mean, that's exactly what you were going through. I mean, it wasn't fun at all. It was probably pretty hellish, at times too, but God speaks his whisper in some of the hellish moments of our life. And so just to hear how you responded in that way. And so now picking up, you're in Oklahoma, you make the move to Nashville, and, at some point where, you got married, you have kids. Tell us a little bit about when the years of that were happening.
Yeah. So at that point in the story, I guess I would have been married about 4 years, no kids. I waited until I was 30 to start having kids.
Amen.
Yeah. And which is another funny thing. When I got married, I think just to shut the people up, that would start saying something. I literally just pulled out of nowhere I'll have kids when I'm 30. Like I had no basis for that. I literally just made that up one day. But kid you not, I literally told my parents like the week of my 30th birthday that I was pregnant. So I kept my word.
That's funny timing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so I was married, no kids, and it got to the point. I think anybody that has worked at a church and especially moved to a city for a church probably can grasp and understand the concept that once that church isn't a part of your life, you're kind of like, why am I here?
Yeah.
And this isn't a fun place to live. And so, it's funny, Rhett, tying back into some parts of your story. I mean, initially the conversations with my husband kind of started like, okay, well, we'll either move to Dallas or Nashville, we'll either go help that church down there, or we'll go to Nashville. And obviously, going to Nashville just made sense, knowing I was going to do music and recording and all of that. And so that's where I ended up. And just so worked out, as God is kind, all of my family ended up moving as well. So we all moved within about a 6-month span.
Destined to be Nashville people. Like right now in your life, what's some of the things that you're dreaming about? In the midst of having a podcast, you're an author. You've released projects. So it's not like you don't have things going on, but I also know there's the dreams that are in your heart that you're pursuing, you and your family.
Yeah. Obviously I want my boys to grow up and love Jesus and, the obvious things there. I think the podcast is still a newer thing, and there's so much about that that has been a step of obedience, of literally open-handed, like, God, I know you're telling me to do this. It's a huge labor of love.
Yeah, it is.
That has no financial advancement to my life. Right. It's just now a weekly, all sorts of weekly tasks related to it that need to happen. So, there's elements of that where you're like, make it make sense, God. But, I know that it's something he's called me to do. I feel like there's so many possibilities of what that can become and be. It was interesting. I had a conversation with a ministry leader at a conference back at the beginning of the year. And he said something to me just about how many churches were in America. And, just based on that number, it would be real easy to say that there's at least 1 million pastors' kids, just in America, which sent me down a Google search, rabbit trail one day trying to figure out, okay, how many churches are there worldwide? How many pastors are there worldwide? And, hypothetically, how many pastors' kids, might there be? And, that gets into millions. Mm-hmm. And so realizing the potential of who all can be affected by these stories and testimonies and conversations is a pretty large group of people. And so I think there's a lot of other things that could come from that one day, as far as a book. And, some parents have asked me for resources, especially and related to the ones that have younger PKs,
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, who knows? So many things could happen there. I mean, on the Yancy music side of things, okay, I do have a dream. I would love for, because so now you have all these national touring, like worship concert events that happen, right? We could name the names.
Yeah.
We could name the mega churches that do them, right? I would love to see one of those or many of those include a family component. Because in many cases, families are already there. Why not have a set at the night, whether it's the beginning of the night, whether it's in between something else that is geared towards those younger kids in the audience, and a way to get on their level and invite them to worship and participate as well. I think that would be a crazy cool thing.
That's
so
awesome.
that's a dream that I have one day, that some of those entities would fully embrace what it is that they're offering.
The entities are definitely listening.
Let's let the entities listen.
Because I know a girl that would be great at it.
Oh, we do too.
Yes.
We're looking at it right now.
There is a huge need for that. I would have never thought that, but hearing that and that vision to that would be so powerful and so beneficial to every single person in the room.
I love hearing you open up your dream and saying that out loud, but that's, wow. I mean, that would be amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I have major companies out there that will ask me questions about why has, whatever Christian kids thing never taken off. Like, even from major labels, there's been times that they try to go do a Christian kids music thing. And I mean, really, in many ways, nothing's worked since Salty,
Wow. Some people are listening to Salty. What does salt shakers have to do with anything?
Listen, I know we're being self-serving here, but
it's
Yancy,
true.
I love that you just said Salty.
Yeah,
not everybody knows what that means.
Salty the songbook.
He's fantastic, and it was a thing, but I don't.
That's awesome.
That's not relevant
really
for
think
today.
there's been any one singular thing that has impacted the bulk of just even American Christianity and families in the way that has. And so, there's a lot of holes that are out there and related to Christian kids media. I see so many other things in the world. You could talk about a Blippy tour or, many, many other things. We could all name them that we probably at some point have bought tickets to such event.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And it's like, it happens in mainstream culture, and things like that in Christian culture do not happen, which makes zero sense.
Yeah.
And so, I remember this was back when my oldest, was watching Paw Patrol. So that's been a minute, but we went to the Paw Patrol live event here in Nashville. And, that week I saw grandparents complaining about how much the tickets were, on Facebook that week and different things. And there's this one, it's interesting. There's this one, it's probably like a Catholic church or something that's down by our Performing Arts Center in Nashville. And they price gouge their parking lot like crazy. It's kind of one of those, like, you park there one time and you learn, like, don't ever park in that lot.
I'm Ubering it next time.
Charging a pretty penny for that one.
Yeah, exactly.
And, but it's like, there's people that they've gone downtown, they're paying for parking. They're going through not being convenient. I think when you A-B it to the church, there are so many things that everyone would say, these are the excuses that have to be removed from a church experience. And it's like, well, I mean, people are doing that all day long to go over here to this event,
That's true.
Inconvenient. They're walking, they're paying, like, all the things. And, I'm like, at that event, they're selling Paw Patrol stuffed animals that you could buy at your local Walmart and get for easily a third of the price.
You got to get it there.
And, I had an aha moment that day sitting there, and I was just like, parents want to create memories with their kids.
Absolutely.
They are willing to invest finances, time, inconvenience
Mm-hmm.
to have something to point back to
Yep.
where they see that overpriced Paw Patrol dog in their house or whatever. And they go, remember when we, like I can think Disney on Ice, like we've got swords in our house, that are like from that experience. And,
Oh, yeah.
But you see it, you play with it, and you remember, oh yeah, mom spent time with me to go do that. And so I think that was a light bulb moment for me, where on the flip side as well, I realized I get to do that for churches.
Yes.
I get to help them create those kind of memories with their families. But the truth is, I can count on one hand how many people do anything like what I do and offer that to churches. And so it's a very underserved area where there's so many opportunities on both sides, both for churches to choose to do it and offer it, and both for other people to come up behind me and do something fun to impact families.
Well, yeah, and people might not really realize, because they're at such a young age, they will go after God. They will worship. Yes, they're going to jump up and down. They're going to have fun.
Yeah.
But I just know what my eyes have seen. If you lead them in that song, it's amazing. They're shutting their eyes. They're locked in. Mm-hmm. They're singing to Jesus. There are those of them, they're having their own encounters where I know for a fact that it's going to be the Yancy that grows up, and it's going to say, I remember a moment where I felt the whispers of God, and it happened in that setting. They're encountering God, and they are ready to encounter God if we can facilitate the right moments and create the right experiences. We love what you're doing, and so many things that you're getting to be a part of. You're an author. You are a worship leader. Are you doing next gen coaching?
Yeah, so I have a worship leader coaching group I say next gen because depending on your setup, they could be involved in both kids and student ministry, and I have history and experience with all of it. So, can certainly speak into that. But yeah, I'm doing a couple groups a year. So it's a program called Chorus, and you can go to yancyministries.com/coaching to learn more about that. I'm currently leading a group right now, so it's just a small group. And then there'll be another group in the fall. So would love to pour into you and just help you be more intentional and, make worship be a bigger success and be more fruitful just in how you craft your worship sets and your intentionality to lead and help kids experience the presence of God.
Yeah.
The podcast is still, I'm interviewing PKs and ministry kids, and that's amazing. And if that's your story, you'll certainly enjoy it. But I also just want to put the invitation out there for any church leader of any kind to listen, because I feel like what these conversations offer up is I'm handing to you on a silver platter.
Yes.
Real life data as to how things are impacting people, and just some things that get overlooked. And it's things that every church in America could make one small little change or shift in how they lead their teams or care for their coworkers' kids or whatever, and fix that issue, And so I think it's a wonderful opportunity for church leaders to listen and learn and just try to make some small modifications to help the current generation of PKs, I hope, be able to love Jesus and love his church with everything they've got.
Along the lines of your podcast, are you noticing a common theme from your conversations? And if so, what would that common theme be from the PKs you're talking to?
I think the most common thing is an obvious one of just the fishbowl, magnifying glass. People have about 5 different ways that they word that. I think that certainly rises to the top as the most obvious thing. Something I have noticed or heard early on that I just thought was interesting is firstborns or only children, how much they took on the weight of certain situations that their parents were walking through. not because anyone asked them to, but just because they were aware enough and they really added a lot of stress to their own life through that. I found realizing that interesting, because I'm like, to me, as a parenting tip, if you're talking moving forward, that would be such an important little check-in piece, especially when you know, like, okay, it is a more stressful season of life or ministry or whatever thing going on, to check on kids that would wear that hat. And just, I had one person kind of word it like, no one asked me to, but looking back, I realized I put a lot on myself walking through that situation. So I think that's a biggie. And I think sometimes, I guess maybe the next biggest thing that comes up is just discipleship opportunities that are missed, basically because you're so close. Yeah, overlook it. Or you assume they're fine. You don't invite them to whatever event because you think they're going to be there because their last name is whatever. And I think just realizing, like, those kids still need the exact same of marketing and invitation given to them to invite them to attend whatever event or be there and not just assume. But then also, I think, especially like whether you're looking at it from a small group perspective or as they're teenagers, I think some people voice like people didn't ask them the same questions or really push to lead them in the same way. And so I think that is interesting. And it's not like I have lots of data to back this up, but I could say if I look at my own life, I could draw this conclusion, which is what kind of made me process it. So this one girl I was talking to, and her dad really had an affair, so that's why her parents officially, ended up divorced. She's in ministry. Her brother wants nothing to do with church. And as she just talked about her story, though, she always had leaders that were speaking into her life, giving her opportunity, lots and lots of relationship. Her brother didn't. And that's where I can put it through the filter of my life, and I can go, And I brought this up to her, and I was just like, how much of a factor do you think this is? Because I think if I could just maybe like challenge anybody that works at a church, and even talking about like, talk to your volunteers, like talking about the power of those conversations, encourage them with those words. I bet if you went and looked at the long list of people, I bet you could start sorting out the ones who stayed, the ones who had buy-in, with the ones who didn't, by who had the personal relationships, who had the leaders that were speaking life into them, building a relationship. I bet it would match.
After listening to some of these episodes too, Yancy, I think the byproduct too of this podcast, the mission is to, get that word out to PKs. But what I've noticed, it seems to have been therapy for you interviewing them, like almost like they're having little breakthrough moments talking to you. Like perhaps they may have not even gone there before. And I'm listening to them have these breakthrough moments, literally live talking to you. Have you found that to be the case too?
I mean, I have one story in particular where the person has messaged me back, and literally a question I asked him made him open up and be aware he actually had experienced a bunch of abuse as a child. And he now is like walking that out with his wife and a therapist and admitting it to some people in his church. And, like his parents don't know. He's like, I still haven't told my parents. And I'm like, you have to tell your parents.
Yeah.
But, I was kind of like, oh my gosh, like this is this is a whole level that I was not anticipating in any way, but it's a different form of healing than I thought. But yeah, and I think a lot of, I've heard many times over where people just say like, no one's ever asked me about my life or my experience. And even that same person, part of them emailing me, like telling me that, they were like, since you've always asked me how you could pray for me, and there's not a lot of other people that do that. And, again, I'm like, red flag, people. Like, why is someone that has spent their life working in a denominational Christian system
Mm-hmm.
and had parents that, had power? I'm like, why am I on the list of people that have asked him, what do you need? How can I pray?
Right.
That feels wrong.
Well, and I would say too, Yancy, in this world, of PKs, and I guess I could really say anybody, we're in such a culture of, hey, shake it off. Hey, get over it. And we have heard that so much when we were young, especially. So all we know is to do things right, I got to shake it off, or I got to get over it. And we've never realized, like, we've not been given the moment to properly lament or really bring in the moment or deal with the moment that we're going through. And when you're asking certain questions, even to the people that you're interviewing, what I find is, as you said a while ago, they haven't been asked these questions before. And so you're almost letting them realize, okay, I wasn't crazy after all. Like, you're normalizing some of the feelings that they had, and they're actually beginning to verbalize. I mean, just like in the Psalms with David, like these Psalms of lament, you're getting this stuff out. I mean, we hear constantly, like, Jesus was studying the Psalms. I mean, that's what, as a little boy, think about that. Jesus, he was studying the Psalms, which meant he was learning all of these things, which obviously it's the Word of God, but he's dealing with these emotions. He's learning how to handle things. By the time he's 30 and launches his ministry, there's so much of this lamenting, rejoicing, all the different type Psalms. And it's almost like when you're having a conversation with somebody, they've had plenty of, we praise, get excited, do this, and all that's well and fine. But just the way that you're softening your voice when you're talking to them. And I kind of keep joking with you. It's like at this therapist, this coach, which you are a coach. You're this coach who's asking them questions for the first time. And they're in the moment. They're processing it. And that's why you're capturing, from what I'm listening to, so much vulnerability on this podcast, because you're almost giving them a moment to lament and letting it be okay to lament and grieve.
Yeah.
Because that's where a lot of this healing's coming. And so I've really appreciated getting to listen to that aspect of it.
I think, part of my whole thing is like, there's lots of conversations I've had one-on-one with people, standing in a four-way or a side hallway or backstage, whether it was at a church or a conference or whatever. But I'm like, I haven't seen that article. I haven't, always read that book or heard that workshop. And I'm just like, I know that there's things that people have to walk through and figure out. And why are we keeping it a secret and not talking about the fact that there's certain things that people need some wisdom from those that have gone before of how to process certain things. And so, it's definitely, it's definitely a God thing, because it's not anything I was trying to do. But at the same time, I realized I'm like, it's storytelling.
That's it.
That's what a song is. That's what a book is. It's, and I think if anything, I certainly am at a weird point in the journey where I'm a little bit of like, what's going on with the music thing? And speaking honestly, last September, leading up to the Doves, kind of knowing the podcast was starting, I also was at a point where I was telling Jesus, it's okay if music is supposed to be done and you just need me doing this thing over here, like, I'll give it to you, like, I'll be okay. And it's interesting. I mean, and then I want a second dove, and like there still is stuff happening, but it's just a weird season. And so I don't really know what's going on with my life, but the one thing I can say that so much of everything else has taught me is, like, I've been interviewed a lot of times in life, and I've had interviews that are so boring and blah and vanilla, and they asked you stupid questions, and like, the questions are so stupid, like, you can't even give a good answer.
Hopefully we didn't ask any of those today.
No, you were fine. But I've done these interviews where you're just like, like, this is dreadful. And then I've been a part of somewhere it's like, oh, that's interesting, and yay, I get to talk about something different and like tell a different story rather than just like this little thing. So I can reflect and see, like, okay, all of that was preparation for me to have these conversations as well. Like, I feel like I did not study journalism, but at the same time, I feel like I've learned a lot about journalism over the years. So it's been, I think, easier to step into.
Yeah, and what I'd like to say, even before we close, is on the podcast, Stained Glass Kids, these questions and the vulnerability you got to even experience with this listen with Yancy, she's able to help take these guests to a place where they get very vulnerable. And even, I'm not a PK, but I have 4 little PKs that live in my house. But for the non-PK person listening, you can jump into this and learn so many valuable lessons through this, and it will open up your eyes. So we encourage you. You can go listen to Stained Glass Kids on any streaming platform.
Well, along those lines, how can people find you on social if they want to follow?
Yeah. So for all my music stuff, Yancy, not Nancy. So Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all the places, Yancy, not Nancy. My music is on all the major platforms. So just type in Yancy, Y-A-N-C-Y, and you will find me. I do some music for older kids, preteens, sounds very normal. And then music for younger kids with a series called Little Praise Party. And then if you want to learn more about the podcast, you can follow Stained Glass Kids on Instagram and Facebook. Go to stainedglasskids.com, and would love for you to listen to these conversations.
And then once again, kind of the one-stop shop, yancyministries.com. And Yancy, it's just been such an honor and a privilege that you took your time, your busy schedule, to actually be with us on Armchair Authentic.
Well, I'm happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Yancy, it's been incredible. Thank you for your time. As Justin said, last time we talked with your dad, he made somewhat of a promise that we're going to come up to Nashville, sit on the back porch, make some music, and have a good time.
Okay.
And so we'd love for you to be a part of that process, you and your family. But you got to bring some of the gumballs that I see in the video here behind you, because the gum looks good. And I don't know if that's a skateboard on the wall.
They may or may not be fresh at this point.
I will say,
I have to check the expiration.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
Yeah, if as you see Yancy, you guys won't get to see her on our podcast, but I mean, we're seeing what you get on the website.
Yeah.
But I mean, behind her, we've just been studying as we've been listening. Like, man, we got some guitar pictures.
Is that a skateboard? You got Agassi Rock. I mean, what is that? It's awesome.
That's for Andre Agassi.
One of my favorite tennis players.
Let's go.
I know, he's my favorite of all time. Yeah, like when he retired or whatever, I went on eBay and I was all sentimental.
Awesome.
And I was like, I have to get this because it says rock and roll tennis camp and there's guitar and whatever.
Yeah.
The skateboard is Andy Warhol, and shoes. I love shoes.
What is that? Like right by the gumball.
We're really getting that.
Yeah.
This is actually the prototype of my Yancy plush doll.
I love it.
The guitar neck got shortened in real life.
You know you have arrived when you have your own plush doll.
And by the way,
very first one.
The animation, if you go to yancyministries.com, it will show some things letting you get to know Yancy. The animation is so cool, how it's literally like animated Yancy. And what she didn't want us to see, which I appreciate her humility here, but as she turned to reach for the statue, I saw I saw the albums here. That's so cool. The projects that she's put out, and guys, please have a listen. This is our friend Yancy, and we're so grateful that we actually got to have this connection with you. And we sure hope our listening audience will go check out and support the ministry that Yancy's doing, because there's some amazing things that she's done, and there's some amazing things to come. And once again, Yancy, thank you so much for being on Armchair Authentic.
Of course. Thanks for having me. And we'll have to do it again because I've got more stories to tell y'all.
Absolutely.
On the next episode of Armchair Authentic,
we can only speak for our story for where it was. I didn't know how to have peace in the tension, so therefore I ran from tension and became the peace quote maker.
and my ability to try to create peace in every environment was to run from conflict.
It's
and that's
so
the
true.
worst
It's
thing
so
you
true.
could ever do.
I'm with
And
you.
I'm like, that's all I ever knew how to do is like, well, and that's why I always like, be kind, be nice, be friendly. Hey, all right, we're not going to talk about that. Let's change the subject. Let's keep moving. But the goal is like, no.
Let's have this out.
Let's have the conversation and learn how to grow through this tension to get the better result on the other end.
It's so, I mean, Rhett, that's so well said. Like that. I mean, talk about cover a multitude of sin. I could have covered a multitude of wasted time or frustration. Even in ministry, growing up many years later, that stuff, I would back off. Like, well, if you're going to come in that high, I guess I'm going to act like you're right. And I would back off and feeling like I'm the right one by backing off. But I'm the one who avoided the chance to say, but I don't agree with that. Here's how I see it.
Man, we cannot wait for that conversation. But until then, we hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe, and we will see you next Monday for a new episode of Armchair Authentic right here with your friends, Rhett and Justin. We'll see you soon.